She had driven 2 hours from Denver to deliver a single sentence. The man standing at the fence didn't look up when the Range Rover stopped. He kept working, pulling a warped board loose from the gate, checking the grain, setting it aside. His flannel was dusty. His hands were certain. She stepped out. Gravel crunched under her shoes. "My father said you needed a wife." He went still, set the board down, turned unhurried, like a man who hadn't been surprised by anything in years. Then he looked at her and said 4 words. She had no answer for them. He had come to Ridgeway on a Thursday in October 2020, with everything that mattered loaded into the bed of a Ford Ranger. Willa was asleep in the passenger seat, her head against the window, one sock half off. Stellan hadn't woken her when they crossed the county line. He hadn't looked back at Denver either. There was nothing behind him he needed to see again. The farm had belonged to his late wife's father, a man named Gus who had worked the land for 31 years and died of a stroke in the spring of 2017, leaving the property to his only daughter. She had never wanted to sell it. She had also never wanted to move back to Colorado. So it sat, the fence posts slowly leaning, the chufa going to seed, the barn roof patching itself with rust. For 3 years it waited. And then Gus's daughter died too, and the farm passed to her husband, who drove out on a Thursday in October with a 9-year-old asleep in the front seat and no particular plan beyond getting through the next season. Stellan fixed the roof first, then the fencing along the north edge, then the water line to the barn, which had cracked somewhere underground and required 3 days of digging by hand. He didn't hire anyone. The work took most of the winter, and he was grateful for that. Grateful for the cold, for the ache in his shoulders at the end of each day, for the fact that Ridgeway was a town where people nodded instead of asking questions. Raymond Hart had moved in next door 11 months before Stellan arrived. He was 70, recently retired, and had bought the adjacent property because he wanted to be somewhere the sky wasn't blocked by buildings. He had built something once, something significant, and now he wanted to spend his mornings looking at mountains. He hadn't expected a neighbor. Their first meeting happened because one of Raymond's 2 Angus cows walked through a gap in the fence on a Wednesday afternoon and found its way to the water trough behind Stellan's barn. Stellan walked the animal back without saying much. Raymond said thank you. That was the extent of it. The following Friday, Raymond showed up at the fence with 2 mugs of coffee. Stellan accepted one without comment. They stood there for about 20 minutes, watching the light move across the Cimarrons. Raymond left when the coffee was gone. He came back the next Friday, and the one after that. By March, it had become a ritual neither of them had named. Raymond brought the coffee. Stellan was always already at the fence. They didn't talk about what they'd done before, who they'd been, where they were going. Raymond had noticed early on that Stellan never volunteered explanations for anything, not for the quality of his fencing, not for the precision of his drainage work, not for the way he read a topographic map the way other men read a newspaper. Raymond recognized that kind of quiet. He had worn it himself, years ago, when he was becoming someone different than who he had been. Camille came once a month, usually on a Saturday. She drove up from Denver in a black Range Rover, stayed 2 nights, helped her father with whatever he couldn't manage alone, and drove back. She was 37 years old and ran a company with 14 locations and 460 employees, and she managed all of it with a precision that left very little room for the unexpected. She had seen the man next door before she'd been formally told he existed. 3rd or 4th visit, standing at her father's kitchen window while the coffee brewed, watching someone replace fence posts in the field across the way. Methodical, unhurried, not the pace of someone being paid by the hour. Her father mentioned him in passing a few times after that. Then one evening in late autumn, she and Raymond were sitting on the porch after dinner, and Raymond looked out toward the fence line and said something quiet that she heard wrong or heard right and simply didn't understand. She went to bed thinking about it. In the morning, she got in her car and drove next door. She told herself she had a legitimate reason for being there. Hart Wellness Group owned a parcel of land, 3.4 acres, acquired in 2019, as part of a larger transaction that had since been restructured. The parcel sat directly adjacent to Raymond's property, which put it adjacent to Stellan's as well. There were easement questions that had never been formally resolved, access rights along the old irrigation ditch that ran through both properties, maintenance responsibilities for the shared fence line on the eastern edge. She was a CEO, These were operational matters. It made sense to address them directly. That was what she told herself. Stellan was on the porch when she came up the drive. He went inside, returned with 2 folding chairs and a flat wooden board, and set it all up as a table without being asked. Then he went back inside again and came out with a tube of rolled maps. He spread the topographic survey across the board and weighted the corners with stones from his pocket. The easement runs along this line, he said, tracing it with a blunt finger. Original filing was 1983. It's been referenced in every subsequent transfer here, here, and here. He indicated 3 points on the survey without hesitating. The maintenance responsibility is split at the 3rd post from the north marker. Your company's side of the line. Your company's obligation. Camille looked at the map. Then she looked at him. You pulled the filing history. I looked it up. That's not a county assessor search. That's a title chain. He didn't answer. You studied this, she said. He picked up one of the cornerstones and turned it over in his hand. Some things you don't forget. Her phone buzzed on the board between them. She glanced at the screen. Priscilla UN, her company's general counsel, calling from Denver. She picked up. I'm in Ridgeway, Camille said. Can I call you back in? There was a pause on the other end. Not long. Half a breath. Ridgeway? Priscilla said, and something shifted almost imperceptibly in her voice. Then, of course. Whenever you're ready. She hung up. Camille set the phone down. She had not noticed the pause. She had not noticed the way Priscilla's tone had flattened for just that half second. The way a person's voice goes flat when they recognize something they weren't expecting. Across the table, Stellan was gathering the maps. He rolled them with the same efficiency he'd unrolled them, secured them with a rubber band, and handed Camille the annotated copy he'd made on a separate sheet, the boundary line highlighted, the easement flagged, the maintenance split marked with a small penciled arrow. She took it. She read it. There was nothing on the page that required argument. She was about to stand when he spoke again, not looking at her, still focused on returning the maps to their tube. Your father wasn't wrong about me needing a wife, he said. He was wrong about what that means. He went inside. The screen door closed behind him without a sound. Camille sat at the wooden board in the morning light with the annotated survey in her hands and the Cimarrons at the edge of her vision. And she turned the sentence over in her mind the way he had turned that stone. She couldn't find the loose edge of it. She couldn't find where to pull. The man inside that house knew something she hadn't thought to ask yet. She could feel the shape of it. She just couldn't name it. Doran Keswick found out about the second visit on a Tuesday. Rural towns talked. A Range Rover with Denver plates at the same farm twice in 8 days was the kind of detail that moved through Ridgeway without anyone intending it to. Keswick called a private research firm in Colorado Springs he had used before and gave them a name, Stellan Vore. What came back was a gap. The name appeared in Colorado records going back to birth, and then, after 2020, almost nothing. No business registrations, no professional filings, no civic board memberships, a property deed for the Ridgeway farm, a truck registration, a library card. Keswick read the report twice. When a man that age had that kind of professional void, it meant one of 2 things. He had failed spectacularly and retreated, or he had succeeded spectacularly and disappeared on purpose. The first type was harmless. He authorized a deeper pull and set the cost against the discretionary account he managed without board oversight. Camille, meanwhile, drove back to Ridgeway on Friday with the annotated survey in her bag and a reason she had rehearsed twice. She'd had a copy made at the Denver office and noticed an error in the parcel boundary notation, wanted to confirm it against the original. It was not a strong reason. She didn't examine it closely. Stellan was on the north fence when she arrived the section that ran along the dry creek bed, where the posts had been sinking for years on the soft bank. She parked and walked out to him. They went along the fence line together, her in heels that were wrong for the terrain, him not commenting on that. He pointed out where the creek bed had shifted 16 inches east over the past decade, taking a thin strip of soil with it and undercutting 3 posts. He'd staked the new line already. He would reset the posts before the ground froze. Most people only see what's flowering, he said, crouching to press his thumb into the soft earth near a post base. They miss what's moving underneath. She wasn't sure if he was talking about the fence. She asked about his wife without planning to. The question came out while she was looking at the mountains rather than at him, which was probably why she let herself ask it. He didn't break stride. She was brilliant, he said. She made everything look easy, including leaving. He said it without bitterness, the way a person states a fact about whether it had happened. It was part of the landscape now. Camille didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been smaller than the silence he offered instead. They were almost back at the truck when the back door of the farmhouse opened, and Willa came out carrying a plate covered in a dish towel. She was 9 years old and moved with the deliberate calm of a child who had learned to read rooms early. She saw Camille and stopped, assessed her without expression for a full 3 seconds, then continued to her father and held out the plate. "Ham and cheddar," she said. "I made 2. Stellan took 1/2. He looked at Camille with a brief, neutral expression that was, if she was reading it correctly, an offer. She took the other half. Willa nodded once, as if confirming something, and went back inside. Later, in the car with the engine off, Camille sat looking at the dark farmhouse windows. The light in the kitchen was the last to go out. She had eaten the sandwich. She hadn't meant to stay that long. She didn't start the engine for several minutes after the light went off, and she could not have explained, if asked, what she was waiting for. Raymond called her into his study that night, which he only did when something was on his mind. He was in the leather chair by the window, the one he'd brought from his Denver office when he'd retired. She sat across from him on the edge of the ottoman, which was the only place to sit that faced him directly. "You've been over to Stellan's twice," he said. There were easement questions. He looked at her the way he used to look at legal briefs, patiently, waiting for the argument to find its own weakness. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "The other evening on the porch." "What was the whole sentence?" "I said what I said, Dad." He was quiet for a moment, looking past her toward the window. Outside, the night was clear and very dark. The kind of dark you only got this far from a city. "I've been watching that man for almost a year," he said. "You know what I've never heard him do? Explain himself. Not once. He fixed that whole barn roof, without telling a soul what he'd done before that made him know how to do it. He does the math in his head that other people need 3 software programs for, and he never once said back when I used to, or in my previous life, or any of the things people say when they want credit for what they've given up." He settled back in the chair. "I left law when I was 35 years old, he said. Walked away from a partnership track in Denver to open a wellness center in a strip mall in Fort Collins, with $18,000 and no guarantee of anything. Your mother stood in that parking lot with me and didn't ask a single question. She just said, 'What do you need me to carry?'" Camille remembered the story. She had heard it before, though usually with less specificity. "I recognized something in him," Raymond said simply. "The way a person looks when they've chosen correctly. So why send me over there with a sentence you knew I'd misread?" He smiled, not unkindly. "Because you would have found a reason not to go if I'd explained it properly." She didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. Back in her room, she picked up her phone and opened a new message to Stellan. She had his number from the easement exchange, a practical artifact of a practical reason for contact. She typed, "Are you free for coffee sometime this week?" She looked at it for a moment, deleted it, typed, "Would you want to have coffee sometime?" Deleted that too. She typed, "Coffee? Saturday?" and sent it before she could think about it again. His reply came 15 minutes later, Saturday morning. True grit. "I'll be the one with the dirty boots." No question mark. No request for explanation. Just the information. And the slight dry note at the end. That was the closest he'd come to a joke. She set the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark for a while, thinking about the fact that she had texted a man without knowing what she wanted from the conversation. It had been a long time since that had happened. She wasn't sure it had ever happened actually. Not like this. The board meeting happened on a Wednesday, 10 days before the Saturday coffee. Keswick presented the VantageMed acquisition with clean slides and conservative projections. The offer valued Heart Wellness Group at $340 million, with VantageMed taking controlling interest after 18 months, and Camille retained as a figurehead CEO for no less than 3 years. The language around that last part was careful. Keswick had chosen the words thoughtfully. She didn't say yes. She said she needed more time. After the room cleared, Priscilla appeared at her elbow in the corridor. "There's something you should look at before you form a position," she said. "The trust provisions in the original charter, the ones your father included in 2003. "I know what's in the charter." Priscilla looked at her for a moment. Read them again, she said. Then she walked away. Camille spent an hour that evening with Section 9 of the Charter on her screen. The language was dense and specific. She wasn't sure she understood all of it. She wasn't sure Keswick didn't. Saturday morning, True Grit Cafe was half full when she arrived. Stellan was already there, corner table, window facing Main Street, work boots that were, as promised, not clean. 2 cups of black coffee on the table. He had ordered without knowing what she drank, and he had been right, and he didn't mention that. They talked for over an hour, not about the company at first, about Willa's fixation with agricultural engineering textbooks, about the silence of Ridgeway in December, when the summer people left and the town went back to being itself, about Raymond's 3 failed batches of goat cheese. Camille found herself laughing twice. Both times it surprised her. Then Stellan asked without preamble, "What keeps you up at night?" About the company. She had been asked versions of this in board meetings, investor calls, the intake forms for executive coaching retreats she'd attended and found mostly useless. She had a practiced answer, careful and calibrated and true about nothing. She didn't give it. "Someone is trying to sell something my father built," she said, "and calling it growth." He didn't nod along. He didn't reframe it or offer a perspective. He just let the sentence be there, then reached for the coffee pot and refilled her cup. That was all. And somehow it was enough to make her keep talking for the next several minutes about what her father had actually built, what it had cost him, and why she could not let it become a line item on someone else's balance sheet. She talked. Stellan listened. Outside the window, a dog crossed Main Street and disappeared between 2 parked trucks. On the sidewalk afterward, she stood in the cold before getting into her car. Priscilla knew something about the charter she hadn't read closely enough, and Stellan, who had never once explained himself, who read title chains the way other people read the news, had listened to her the way someone listens when they already understand the terrain. She drove back to Denver with both of those thoughts beside her, and she didn't turn the radio on once. The second investigative report on Stellan Vore arrived in Keswick's inbox on a Monday and contained the same absence as the first. No professional association memberships, no conference appearances, no published commentary, no former colleagues who'd tagged him anywhere public. The firm in Colorado Springs noted that this level of deliberate profile reduction was unusual and typically required legal counsel to achieve. Keswick had his lawyer draft a memo to the full board, arguing that the trust provision Priscilla had referenced was legally dormant, that Colorado statute established a 20-year activation window, and a provision, unreferenced in board minutes since 2003, had effectively lapsed. The memo cited 3 cases. Keswick circulated it the day before Camille was scheduled to review the charter with outside counsel. She read it. Then she read the charter again. The language was ambiguous enough that she genuinely couldn't tell who was right. On Friday evening, she drove to Ridgeway not for any stated reason. She told herself she was checking on her father, which was partly true. She stopped at the weekend farmers market on Main Street, which was winding down, the vendors packing their tables. She was looking at a bin of late-season apples when someone appeared at her elbow. Small, calm, 9 years old. "Those are Fuji's," Willa said. "They're okay. The Honeycrisps are better." She pointed to the next table over. They moved together. Camille bought a bag. Willa told her that the best way to store them was stem side down in a cool, dark place, which her father had explained to her in September. "He explains a lot of things," Camille said. Willa considered this. "He knows a lot of things," she said, the distinction apparently important. Across the market, Stellan had seen them. He stood in the middle of the aisle between 2 tables of winter squash, a canvas bag over one shoulder, and he did not close the distance. He watched his daughter standing comfortably beside Camille, pointing at apples, and he stayed where he was until they looked up